The chandeliers at Ashworth House burned with the steady golden light of several hundred candles. Their flames doubled in the great mirrors that lined the ballroom walls. Music from a string quartet drifted through the perfumed air, threading between conversations and the rustle of silk gowns. The Duchess of Ashworth's midsummer ball had reached that precise hour when anticipation thickened like honey. The Duke of Hartwell, the most eligible and maddeningly elusive peer of the realm, was expected to make his intentions known. Catherine Merriweather stood near the east windows, half concealed by a column draped in ivy and white roses. Her gown was the color of faded lavender, 2 seasons out of fashion, though her mother's pearl combs anchored her dark hair with quiet dignity. She was not here as a guest of rank. She accompanied her aunt, Lady Matilda Hargrove, whose chronic ailment confined her to a wheeled chair and whose sharp tongue had not dulled with age. Catherine held a glass of lemonade. She had no intention of drinking, and watched the crowd with the careful stillness of someone who had learned to observe without being observed. The Duke moved through the assembly like a ship cutting through still water. He was tall, dark-haired, with a face that seemed carved from the kind of marble that absorbed rather than reflected light, handsome in a way that felt withheld, as though his features were a privilege he granted rather than a gift he possessed. He nodded to Lord Pemberton. He bowed over Lady Lydia's hand. Lady Lydia Pemberton, golden-curled and pink-cheeked, glittered in white satin embroidered with silver thread. Her smile was a polished weapon. Catherine watched the Duke's hand linger a fraction too long over Lady Lydia's gloved fingers, and something inside her chest tightened until it became a small, hard stone. 3 months. It had been 3 months since the rain-soaked afternoon in the gardens at Haverford Park, when she had taken shelter in a crumbling folly and found the Duke already there, his coat drenched, his expression unguarded for the only time she had ever witnessed. He had spoken to her not as a duke to a companion, but as a man to a woman, about the weight of his title, about the loneliness of choice, about the surprising sound of her laughter when the thunder cracked overhead and she refused to flinch. He had looked at her with something that felt like recognition. She had carried that moment like a pressed flower between the pages of her heart. Now he was bowing to Lady Lydia and extending his arm. The music paused. The Duchess of Ashworth, ancient and magnificent in purple velvet, raised her hand for silence. The gesture was unnecessary. Silence had already fallen across the room like a dropped cloth. "Your Grace," the Duchess said, her voice carrying without effort, "I believe you have an announcement." The Duke inclined his head. Lady Lydia's cheeks flushed becomingly. Her father, Lord Pemberton, puffed his chest with the satisfied inflation of a man watching a long-planned transaction reach its settlement. "I am honored," Hartwell said, his voice steady and deep, "to request the hand of Lady Lydia Pemberton. She has done me the great honor of accepting." Applause erupted. High, delighted, the kind of applause that accompanies the satisfaction of collective expectation. Lady Lydia pressed her free hand to her heart. The Duke stood beside her, and he did not look toward the east windows. Catherine set her lemonade glass on the windowsill. Her hand did not tremble. Her face remained as composed as a painted miniature. She turned to her aunt, whose rheumy eyes had fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "I find the heat oppressive," Catherine said. "Shall I fetch your shawl from the retiring room?" Lady Matilda's mouth pressed into a thin line. "The heat," she repeated, her voice dry as kindling. "Fetch nothing. Sit beside me and breathe, child. This night is not over." But Catherine could not sit. She could not breathe. The stone in her chest had become a weight that demanded motion. She moved through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of a servant, and no one stopped her. No one except the Dowager Countess of Morton, who tracked her exit with eyes as black and bright as a raven's. The terrace doors stood open to the July night. Catherine stepped through them and into the darkness. The air outside was cool and smelled of jasmine. She walked to the stone balustrade and gripped it, her fingers curling around the cold ledge as though the earth itself might tilt, and she alone must hold it steady. The music had resumed inside. The celebration had begun. Somewhere in that golden room, the Duke of Hartwell was accepting congratulations while his betrothed beamed at his side. Catherine closed her eyes. She did not weep. She had shed her tears for him months ago in the privacy of her narrow bedchamber after writing a letter she would never send. She had known, she had always known, that a duke did not choose a woman of modest fortune and invisible standing. She had known it, and she had hoped anyway, and now hope had run its course. Behind her, a voice spoke from the shadows. "You are Miss Merriweather." It was not a question. Catherine turned. A woman stood in the doorway to the terrace, silver-haired and straight-backed, leaning on an ebony cane, the Dowager Countess of Morton. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone held a quality that made Catherine's spine straighten. "I am, my lady." The Dowager stepped forward. The cane tapped once, twice on the flagstones. "I have been watching you all evening, Miss Merriweather, and I have been watching the Duke of Hartwell for considerably longer than that." She paused, her gaze sweeping Catherine from head to toe with an appraisal that felt less like judgment and more like measurement. "Tell me, child, do you believe in the justice of drawing rooms?" Catherine's brow furrowed. "I do not understand the question." "I think you do." The Dowager's smile was thin and knowing. "I think you understand a great many things that the women in that ballroom will never grasp, and I think this night has only just begun to reveal its true character." The strings swelled inside. The Dowager extended her cane and tapped it against the balustrade beside Catherine's hand. "Come, Miss Merriweather, you and I have letters to write." Dowager Countess of Morton did not make idle statements. By the time Catherine returned to her aunt's side, the old woman had already summoned her carriage and departed into the night, leaving behind only the lingering scent of lavender water and a single cryptic instruction: "Be ready to receive what others are too foolish to offer." Catherine had no time to puzzle over the meaning. Lady Matilda declared herself exhausted and required immediate removal to their lodgings on Half Moon Street. The journey home was conducted in silence, the carriage wheels rattling over cobblestones while Catherine stared at her own reflection in the dark glass. Her aunt said nothing, but her gnarled hand found Catherine's and held it with surprising strength. Inside Ashworth House, the celebration continued. Lady Lydia Pemberton accepted kisses on both cheeks and compliments that stuck to her like honey. She played her role beautifully, the radiant bride-to-be, the chosen one, the woman who had captured the uncapturable Duke. Her father, Lord Pemberton, drank 3 glasses of champagne in rapid succession and began calculating aloud how the union would shift the balance of power in the House of Lords. The Duke of Hartwell stood at the center of it all, and felt a spreading numbness that he mistook for contentment. He had done what was expected. He had secured the alliance his title demanded. Lady Lydia was beautiful, well-born, and politically advantageous. Her father commanded a voting bloc that would ensure Hartwell's legislative priorities sailed through without opposition. The match made sense. It was tidy. It was correct. It was not, however, the match that had occupied his thoughts since a rainstorm in April. He had not seen Catherine Merriweather in the ballroom. He had deliberately avoided searching for her. Some cowardice, and he recognized it now as cowardice, had convinced him that if he did not see her, the memory of that afternoon in the Folly would remain safely contained. He could lock it away in the same mental compartment where he kept his father's disapproving letters and his mother's dying wish that he marry for status. He was good at compartments. He was, after all, a duke. Lady Lydia laughed at something Lady Jersey said, and the sound was high and brittle, and entirely unlike the low, unguarded chuckle Catherine had given when the thunder cracked directly overhead, and she had looked at him with eyes the color of rain. Hartwell excused himself to fetch more champagne. He did not drink champagne. He had declined it 3 times already. No one noticed. The terrace was empty when he reached it. Empty of Catherine, at any rate, though her presence lingered in the air like the afterimage of candle flame. He stood where she had stood. He touched the balustrade where her fingers had curled. The stone was still faintly warm. "Your Grace." He turned. Lord Cedric Ashworth, the Duchess's nephew, stood in the doorway. He was a man of perhaps 30, sun-browned from years at sea, with a captain's bearing and a directness of gaze that many found disconcerting. He was not smiling. "Lord Cedric." "Forgive the intrusion." Cedric stepped onto the terrace without waiting for permission. "I wish to offer my congratulations in private. My aunt's ballroom is not conducive to sincerity." Hartwell inclined his head. "You are kind." "I am not." Cedric stopped beside the Duke and looked out at the dark gardens. "I am observant, and what I observed tonight was a woman who left this terrace with her composure intact and her heart in splinters. While a Duke who should have known better made a public declaration, he clearly regretted before the words were fully spoken." The silence that followed was long and taut as a violin string. "Take care, my lord," Hartwell said quietly. "I am a naval officer. I have been taking care my entire adult life." Cedric turned to face him fully. "Miss Merriweather is under the protection of no one but an invalid aunt. She has no fortune, no title, and no defenders. It would be an easy thing for society to forget her entirely, but I wonder if society will prove so obliging." He left before the Duke could respond. The music continued inside. The night wore on. By dawn, the first letters had begun to circulate. The Dowager Countess of Morton possessed a correspondence network that rivaled the Royal Mail. From her writing desk, in a hand elegant and implacable, she dispatched notes to Lady Jersey, Lady Cowper, Lady Sefton, and the Countess of Leven, the patronesses of Almack's and the unofficial governors of fashionable society. The notes did not mention Lady Lydia Pemberton by name. They spoke instead of dignity, of quiet grace, of a young woman observed by all the right people who had removed herself from a celebration rather than witness the triumph of a rival. They spoke of Catherine Merriweather. Lady Jersey read her note over breakfast and recalled the young woman in the lavender gown. "She held herself beautifully," she remarked to her husband. "Did you see how she exited? Not a trace of self-pity. One must admire such discipline." Lady Cowper, reading a similar missive, recalled something else entirely. "Hartwell danced with her at Haverford," she told her sister. "I saw it. He danced with her twice, and he looked at her as though he had forgotten there were other people in the room. I thought nothing of it at the time. Now I wonder." By midday, 3 prominent hostesses had withdrawn their names from the list of sponsors for the engagement celebration scheduled for the following week. No explanations were offered. None were needed. Lord Pemberton, reviewing his correspondence after a leisurely breakfast, discovered that 2 promised votes for his enclosure bill had evaporated overnight. The members who withdrew their support offered polite, uninformative notes that all shared a single quality. They had wives who had received letters from the Dowager Countess of Morton. The Duke of Hartwell spent the morning in his study, attempting to draft a letter to Catherine and destroying each attempt. The words sounded hollow. Apologies were insufficient. Explanations were excuses. He wrote her name, just her name, and stared at it until the ink dried. At noon, his butler announced a visitor. The Dowager Countess had arrived without warning. She did not wait to be received. She walked into his study with her ebony cane striking the floor like a gavel and sat in the chair opposite his desk without invitation. "You look terrible," she observed. "Good, you should." Hartwell set down his pen. "Madam, I am not in a humor for—" "You are not in a humor at all. You are in a crisis, and you do not yet know it." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded sheet of paper, worn at the creases. "This letter was written 3 months ago by a young woman who believed herself in love and believed herself wise enough to keep that love to herself. It was never meant to be sent. It was discovered by her aunt while cleaning a writing desk and brought to me this morning." She placed the letter on the desk between them. "Read it." Hartwell did not move. "Read it," the Dowager repeated. Or I shall read it aloud, and you will be forced to hear your own failures spoken in another's voice, which would be worse, I think." He picked up the letter. He unfolded it. The handwriting was small and precise and beautiful. The words were addressed to no one. They were simply a confession, poured out in a moment of private honesty. "I do not know when I began to love him. Perhaps it was the moment he smiled in the rain and admitted he was frightened of thunderstorms. Perhaps it was earlier, perhaps it was always. What I know is that I shall never speak of it. He is a duke. I am a companion. There is no bridge between those two stations. I will carry this feeling as I carry everything else, quietly, without complaint, until it fades or I do. He will marry someone else. I have made my peace with that. But I wanted to write it somewhere just once, that I loved him, that he was seen, that someone in this world saw the man beneath the title and loved him without wanting anything but his happiness." The letter ended. Hartwell set it down with hands that were not entirely steady. The silence in the study was absolute. "She wanted nothing," the dowager said. "Not your title, not your wealth, not your influence. She wanted your happiness, and you gave her Lady Lydia Pemberton." "Where is she?" The Duke's voice was rough. "In a townhouse on Half Moon Street, packing her aunt's belongings. They leave for the country tomorrow. She believes she is retreating. She does not yet know that society has already decided she is advancing." The dowager rose. She looked down at the Duke with an expression that held no pity and no mercy. "The kingdom has chosen its Duchess, Your Grace. The only question remaining is whether you will be wise enough to agree." Townhouse on Half Moon Street stood 3 stories tall and narrow as a spine. Its windows faced a quiet thoroughfare lined with plane trees, and in the gray light of early afternoon, it wore its modesty like a well-mended coat. Inside, Catherine Merriweather folded linens into a trunk and did not allow herself to think. Upstairs, Lady Matilda Hargrove directed the single housemaid with the precision of a military commander. They would depart for Hertfordshire at first light. The lease on the townhouse had been surrendered. There was nothing left to do but pack the remnants of a season that had ended not with a triumph, but with a quiet, dignified withdrawal. Catherine had not wept. She had not raged. She had written a brief note to her aunt's landlord, settled the accounts with the butcher and the coal merchant, and selected which gowns would survive the journey. Her hands were steady. Her mind was a careful blank. At 2 o'clock, a knock sounded at the front door. The maid answered. Catherine heard the low murmur of masculine voices, then the maid's footsteps ascending the stairs with uncharacteristic haste. "Miss, there is a gentleman, a Lord Cedric Ashworth. He asks if you and Lady Matilda are receiving." Catherine paused with a chemise half folded in her hands. Lord Cedric, the naval captain from the ball, the one who had found her on the terrace after the dowager departed, who had offered his arm and walked her back to her aunt without pressing for conversation. She remembered his eyes, steady and kind and too perceptive. "Show him into the parlor," she said. "I will inform my aunt." Lady Matilda received the news with a gleam of interest that cut through her usual discomfort. "Ashworth, the Duchess's nephew. That is not a casual caller, niece. Help me into my chair and do not keep him waiting." The parlor was small but bright, furnished with pieces that had been elegant 2 decades earlier and had aged into respectability. Lord Cedric rose as Catherine entered, pushing Lady Matilda's chair. He bowed with the ease of a man who had been raised in drawing-rooms but had learned his manners on the quarterdeck. "Miss Merriweather, Lady Matilda, you are kind to receive me on so little notice." "We are packing," Lady Matilda said bluntly. "You are a welcome distraction from the tedium of trunks. Sit, young man, and state your purpose." Cedric smiled. He had a good smile, unhurried, genuine, touched with faint lines around the eyes from squinting into sea winds. He sat across from them and leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. "I will be direct. My mother is hosting a musical evening next Thursday at her home in Berkeley Square. She has asked me to convey her most earnest hope that Miss Merriweather and Lady Matilda will attend. Catherine's hand stilled in her lap. A musical evening at the Ashworth residence was not a casual invitation. It was a declaration. It meant the Ashworth family, one of the oldest and most respected in England, was placing its considerable social weight behind her. "I do not understand," Catherine said carefully. "Your aunt already hosted the ball last night. Lady Lydia's engagement was announced there. Surely your mother's evening will be attended by the same company that witnessed—" "The same company," Cedric interrupted gently, "that witnessed a great deal more than the engagement. My aunt, the Duchess, spent the latter portion of the evening in conversation with the Dowager Countess of Morton. She has since revised her opinion of certain events." He paused. "She is not alone in this revision." Lady Matilda made a sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. "The ton is turning on the Pembertons. I did not think I would live to see such a thing." "The ton," Cedric said, "is turning toward Miss Merriweather. The question is whether she will allow them." Catherine looked at him directly. His gaze did not waver. There was no pity in it, no condescension, only a straightforward respect that she had not expected and did not quite know how to receive. "Why?" she asked. "Why would your family extend such support to a woman of no consequence?" Cedric considered the question. "I have spent 15 years at sea, Miss Merriweather. I have learned to read weather. The skis over London have shifted. The woman who left that ballroom with her dignity intact while the victors celebrated their hollow triumph, that woman has captured the imagination of everyone who matters, including, I confess, my own." The admission was delivered without pressure, without expectation. He was simply stating a truth. Catherine drew a breath. "I will consult my aunt." "You will accept," Lady Matilda declared. "We will unpack the blue silk. We will arrive precisely on time. And you, Captain, will tell your mother that we are honored." Cedric rose. He bowed over Lady Matilda's hand, then Catherine's. His fingers were warm and calloused and entirely proper. "The carriage will come for you at 7. He hesitated at the door. "Miss Merriweather, the Duke of Hartwell, has spent the morning in his study. No one has seen him. His engagement to Lady Lydia stands, but the ground beneath it is shifting. I thought you should know." He departed. Catherine stood in the parlor, one hand resting on the back of her aunt's chair, and felt the careful blankness of her mind begin to crack. The Duke of Hartwell, meanwhile, had not remained in his study. An hour after the Dowager's departure, he had called for his horse and ridden to Half Moon Street with the letter tucked inside his coat. He did not know what he would say. He only knew that he must say something, that Catherine must not leave for the country believing he had forgotten her, that he had chosen ambition over affection without a backward glance. The truth was messier and more shameful, but it was a truth she deserved to hear. He dismounted, he climbed the steps, he knocked. The maid answered. She recognized him, her eyes widened, and curtsied deeply. "The Duke of Hartwell to see Miss Merriweather." The maid disappeared. The Duke waited on the step, the July sun warm on his shoulders, the letter burning in his pocket. Minutes passed. He heard footsteps, not Catherine's, but the heavier tread of the maid returning. The maid curtsied again. Her face was apologetic and slightly terrified. "Your Grace, Miss Merriweather is not at home." It was the standard formula of refusal, delivered by a servant who clearly wished to be anywhere else. Hartwell had heard it 100 times in 100 different drawing rooms. It had never stopped him before. It stopped him now because it was Catherine who had spoken it, and Catherine never lied. She was not at home to him. He stood on the step, the door closing softly before him, and experienced something entirely unfamiliar. He was a duke. He commanded armies of tenants, fortunes that spanned counties, political influence that reached into the highest chambers of government, and none of it mattered. None of it could make Catherine Merriweather open a door she had chosen to close. From an upper window, Lady Matilda watched him stand motionless on the step. She watched him remove his hat and run a hand through his hair. She watched him finally, slowly, descend the steps and ride away. "He loves her," she said to no one. "The idiot loves her, and he is only now discovering it." Catherine, in the next room, heard her aunt's words and did not respond. She was refolding the blue silk gown with hands that had finally begun to tremble. The Duke of Hartwell did not return to his study. He dismissed his horse at the mews and walked the streets of Mayfair with his hat pulled low and his hands clasped behind his back. Passers-by who recognized him stepped aside quickly, sensing something in his expression that discouraged greeting. He walked for 2 hours through streets he did not see, and when he finally returned to Hartwell House, his butler informed him that Lord Pemberton had called twice and left increasingly agitated notes. Hartwell glanced at the notes and consigned them to the fire. He had been trained from childhood to value advantage. His father had drilled into him the sacred duty of a duke, to protect the estate, to expand influence, to marry strategically. Love was a luxury for lesser men. Affection was a distraction. The late Duke of Hartwell had married a woman he respected and barely tolerated, and he had considered this the natural order of things. The current Duke had absorbed these lessons thoroughly. He had courted Lady Lydia Pemberton because her father offered political capital, because her beauty was undeniable, because every advisor and ally had assured him the match was ideal. He had ignored the hollow feeling in his chest when he imagined waking beside her for the next 40 years. He had ignored the way her laughter grated on his nerves, and her conversation circled endlessly around fashion and gossip, and the failings of other women. He had ignored all of it because a duke did what was necessary. And then he had read Catherine's letter. Someone in this world saw the man beneath the title. He sat in his armchair as dusk gathered and reread those words until they blurred. She had seen him. Not the dukedom, not the wealth, not the political machinery, him. The man who was frightened of thunderstorms and weary of solitude and desperate for a single conversation that did not feel like a transaction. And he had repaid that seeing with public rejection. The fire crackled. The letter remained in his hand. Across London, in the Ashworth townhouse on Berkeley Square, Captain Lord Cedric Ashworth was having a conversation with his mother that would have interested the Duke greatly. Lady Ashworth was a woman of 60 years, silver-haired and serene, with the same direct gaze as her son. She had married a second son who had died at Trafalgar, raised her children alone, and built a social position that owed nothing to anyone. When Cedric informed her of his visit to Half Moon Street, she listened without interruption and then nodded once. "You like her?" "I respect her," Cedric said. "I also like her. The two are not mutually exclusive." "And the Duke?" Cedric's jaw tightened. "The Duke made his choice. He will live with it. Meanwhile, a woman of remarkable character is being treated as though she should vanish quietly to spare everyone's discomfort. I am not inclined to let that happen." His mother smiled. It was a small smile, private and knowing. "You are your father's son. He could never abide a wrong left unrighted." She rose and walked to her writing desk. "Thursday's musical evening will be the most significant event of the season. I will see to it personally." The preparations began the following morning and proceeded with the quiet efficiency of a military campaign. Invitations were dispatched. The guest list was curated with surgical precision. Every person of influence, every arbiter of taste, every matron whose opinion shaped the whispers that became reputations. Lady Lydia Pemberton was invited because exclusion would have been a scandal. Her attendance was expected, and her discomfort would be instructive. On Thursday morning, Catherine stood before a mirror in the townhouse on Half Moon Street while her aunt's maid made final adjustments to the blue silk gown. The color was deep as a winter sky, and it transformed her. The woman in the mirror was not a companion but a lady of consequence, calm, poised, with eyes that held secrets and a mouth that did not need to smile to be beautiful. "You will do," Lady Matilda pronounced from her chair. "You will do very well indeed. Remember, child, you are not attending to seek approval. You are attending because approval has already been bestowed. The Dowager Countess has spoken. The Duchess of Ashworth has spoken. Tonight is not an examination. It is an acknowledgement. Catherine turned from the mirror, and if he is there. Lady Matilda's expression sharpened. He will be there. Lord Cedric assured me the invitation was extended. The question is not whether the Duke attends. The question is whether you will allow his presence to disturb you. It will not. I know it will not. That is what makes you dangerous to him. Lady Matilda settled back in her chair. Let us go. Let us be precisely on time. The carriage arrived at 7. The journey to Berkeley Square took 20 minutes. When they pulled up before the Ashworth residence, the street was already crowded with carriages, and footmen in silver livery were lighting the torches that flanked the entrance. Lights spilled from every window. Music drifted from within, not the formal quartet of a ball, but the gentler strains of a harp, intimate and welcoming. Cedric was waiting at the door. He stepped forward as Catherine descended from the carriage and offered his arm with a gravity that was almost ceremonial. Miss Merriweather, you are a vision. Captain, you are kind. I am honest. It is a different thing entirely. He led her inside, Lady Matilda following in her wheeled chair pushed by a footman. The entrance hall blazed with candlelight. The hum of conversation reached them from the music room, and as they appeared in the doorway, Catherine felt the shift. Heads turned, whispers rippled. The harpist played on, but the attention of the room had reoriented itself entirely. The Dowager Countess of Morton was already seated in a position of honor near the fireplace. She caught Catherine's eye and raised her glass in a gesture of unmistakable welcome. Lady Jersey, seated beside her, did the same. Lady Cowper nodded with visible warmth. The Duchess of Ashworth herself crossed the room to greet them. "My dear Miss Merriweather," the Duchess said, her voice carrying clearly through the hush. "How lovely you look! Captain Ashworth has spoken of nothing else since he called upon you." The statement was a pronouncement. The room absorbed it. Cedric Ashworth had called upon Catherine Merriweather. The Duchess approved. The alignment was unmistakable. And then Catherine saw the Duke. He stood near the windows, a glass in his hand, his face a mask of rigid control. Beside him, Lady Lydia Pemberton clung to his arm with the desperation of a woman clinging to a sinking ship. Her smile was fixed and brittle. Her eyes moved around the room, cataloging the faces that had turned not toward her, the bride-to-be, but toward the quiet woman in blue silk who had entered on the arm of a decorated naval captain. The temperature of the room had changed. Everyone felt it. Catherine met the Duke's gaze for a single moment. She did not smile. She did not frown. She inclined her head with the barest acknowledgement, the courtesy one might offer a distant acquaintance, and then turned away as Cedric guided her toward a seat near the Dowager Countess. The Duke's glass cracked in his hand. He did not notice. He was watching Catherine Merriweather sit down among the most powerful women in England as though she had always belonged there, and he was realizing that he had never seen her clearly until this moment. She was not a companion. She was not a woman of modest fortune and invisible standing. She was a duchess in everything but name, and the entire room knew it. Beside him, Lady Lydia's grip tightened on his arm. "I wish to leave," she hissed. "You cannot," Hartwell said, and his voice was distant, distracted. "To leave now would be to concede. You cannot afford to concede." "I cannot afford to lose her," he thought, "and I already have." The harpist finished her piece. The room applauded politely. Lady Lydia released his arm and moved toward the refreshment table with the fixed smile of a soldier advancing under fire. She approached Catherine directly, and the conversations around them dimmed to a watchful murmur. "Miss Merriweather," Lady Lydia said, her voice pitched to Carrie, "I wish to say how lovely it is to see you here. After your abrupt departure from the ball, we were all so concerned. I do hope you are quite recovered." The words were silk wrapped around a blade. Catherine rose. She stood exactly at Lady Lydia's height, and her gaze was steady and utterly unafraid. "You are gracious to inquire," Catherine said. "I was not unwell. I simply found the celebration uncomfortable. I did not wish to cast any shadow upon your happiness. It seemed kinder to withdraw." The silence that followed was profound. Catherine had not accused. She had not defended. She had simply stated a truth with such gentle precision that Lady Lydia's manufactured concern collapsed under its own weight. The Dowager Countess spoke into the silence. "Miss Merriweather, come sit beside me. I wish to discuss something of great importance." It was a summons and a rescue and a coronation, all in one. Catherine curtsied to Lady Lydia, a perfect, graceful curtsy that contained not a trace of irony, and crossed the room to the seat beside the Dowager. Lady Lydia stood alone. Her smile remained in place, but something behind it had fractured. She turned and walked back to the Duke, who had watched the entire exchange without moving. "You must do something," she whispered fiercely. "They are making a fool of me." The Duke looked at his betrothed. Then he looked at Catherine Merriweather, seated beside the Dowager Countess, her head bent in quiet conversation, her composure absolute. "There is nothing to be done," he said. "The battle is already lost. We simply did not realize we were fighting it." The musical performances continued through the evening. A soprano with a voice like silver bells, a pianist who drew tears from Chopin, a violinist whose bow seemed to weep. Between each piece, the room rearranged itself in subtle currents and eddies, and every current carried the same message. Catherine Merriweather was seated beside the Dowager Countess of Morton. The Duchess of Ashworth had embraced her. Lord Cedric Ashworth, one of the most eligible and elusive bachelors of the season, had not left her side for more than a quarter-hour. Lady Lydia Pemberton observed all of this from her position near the windows. Her father had not accompanied her, a telling absence that several guests noted. She was flanked only by Lady Honoria Thistlethwaite, a devoted follower whose loyalty compensated for what it lacked in intelligence. Together, they formed a small island of Pemberton support in a sea that had shifted decisively toward the Ashworth current. "She has bewitched them," Lady Lydia murmured. "A woman with no fortune, no title, no connections. It defies comprehension." Lady Honoria nodded eagerly. "It is quite shocking indeed. One wonders what she has promised them." The truth, had they known it, was far simpler and far more damning. Catherine had promised nothing. She had asked for nothing. She had simply been herself, and in the wake of Hartwell's engagement, that self had become a symbol. Every matron who had ever been slighted by a husband's ambition, every young woman who had ever been passed over for a prettier face or a larger dowry, every observer who valued character over display, all of them had found in Catherine a vessel for their hopes. The Dowager Countess was speaking to her in a low voice that carried no farther than their 2 chairs. "You are doing beautifully. Do not let the triumph show, and do not let the fear. You are neither victor nor victim. You are simply a woman who knows her worth and does not require validation to believe in it." "I am not afraid," Catherine said. "I am puzzled. I have done nothing to earn this." "On the contrary, you have done the hardest thing of all." The Dowager's dark eyes glinted. "You have refused to beg. You have refused to scheme. You have refused to make yourself small to make others comfortable. That kind of dignity is rarer than diamonds and far more valuable." The Duke, from his position across the room, watched Catherine's profile as she listened to the Dowager. He had not approached her. He did not trust himself to speak without revealing everything. The sleepless nights, the letter he had read until he could recite it, the engagement that felt more like a sentence with each passing hour. Lord Pemberton had sent another note that afternoon. His political coalition was unraveling. 3 more votes had been lost. The marriage settlement, so carefully negotiated, was being questioned by his own solicitors. The tide of public opinion had turned with a speed that bewildered him, and he demanded that Hartwell do something, make a public statement, host a grand event, quash the rumors that his daughter's position was insecure. Hartwell had done nothing. He had come to this musical evening with the half-formed intention of speaking to Catherine, of explaining himself, of begging if necessary. But watching her now, surrounded by supporters, calm and luminous and entirely self-contained, he understood that explanation was no longer relevant. She did not need his apology. She had moved beyond the reach of his regret. The final performance of the evening was a duet between the soprano and the pianist. When it concluded, Lady Ashworth rose to thank her guests and invite them to partake of supper in the adjoining room. The movement of the crowd provided cover for a dozen private conversations, and it was in this shuffle that Lady Lydia Pemberton made her final attempt to reclaim the narrative. She intercepted Catherine near the doorway to the supper room. Her approach was witnessed by at least 30 guests, including Lady Jersey and the Duchess of Ashworth. Her voice, when she spoke, was pitched to Carrie. "Miss Merriweather, I feel we have begun poorly. I wish to offer my sincere hope that we may be friends." Catherine paused. The silence around them was immediate and absolute. She looked at Lady Lydia, at the perfect golden curls, the pink cheeks, the smile that did not reach her eyes, and saw a woman who was fighting for her life with the only weapon she possessed. "I bear you no ill will, Lady Lydia," Catherine said. "I wish you every happiness." It was the truth. It was also devastating. Catherine had not accepted the offered friendship, she had transcended it. She had placed herself beyond rivalry, beyond pettiness, beyond the reach of any attack Lady Lydia could mount. The words were kind and they were final. Lady Lydia's smile faltered. For a fraction of a second her mask slipped, and what showed beneath was raw, bewildered fury. She recovered almost instantly, but the damage was done. The room had seen. "That is most gracious of you," Lady Lydia managed. "Most gracious indeed." She swept past Catherine into the supper room. Lady Honoria scurried after her. The crowd resumed its motion, but the whispers had changed pitch. Pity now. Pity for the golden girl who had won the prize and discovered it was hollow. Catherine remained where she was. The Dowager Countess appeared at her elbow. "You handled that perfectly. You are a natural." "I did nothing but speak the truth. I do wish her happiness." Catherine's voice was quiet. "I know what it is to love without hope. I would not wish that on anyone." The Dowager studied her for a long moment. "You still love him." The statement hung between them. Catherine did not deny it. "That is my burden to carry," she said. "Not his and not hers." She moved into the supper room. The Dowager watched her go, and for the first time in many years felt something that might have been hope. The Duke of Hartwell did not attend supper. He had retreated to the library, a vast room lined with leather-bound volumes and lit by a single branch of candles. He stood at the window, looking out at the dark street, and did not turn when the door opened. "I wondered where you had gone." Cedric Ashworth's voice was neutral. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms folded. "I am not in the mood for conversation," Hartwell said. "That is unfortunate. I am." Cedric pushed off the door and walked to the center of the room. "You are still engaged to Lady Lydia Pemberton. That engagement is an anchor around your neck, and you know it. The question is what you intend to do about it." "It is not your concern." "It is my concern because Miss Merriweather is my concern." Cedric's voice hardened. "I have watched you for years, Hartwell. I have watched you make the correct choices, the strategic choices, the choices that advanced your position and preserved your legacy. And I have watched you grow smaller with each one. She deserves better than a man who cannot recognize treasure until he has thrown it away." The Duke turned from the window. His face was haggard in the candlelight. "You think I do not know that? You think I have not spent every hour since the ball understanding exactly what I have done? I think understanding is not action. I think remorse is not redemption. I think that until you stand before her and speak the truth without calculation or strategy, you are still the man who chose Lady Lydia Pemberton in a ballroom full of witnesses." The silence stretched, the candles flickered. The engagement will be dissolved, Hartwell said quietly. The Pembertons will announce it tomorrow. The political damage is too great for Lord Pemberton to continue. He has already signaled his intention to withdraw. I will be free. Cedric absorbed this. Then the question becomes simpler. When you are free, what will you offer her, and will she believe it is genuine? He left without waiting for an answer. The Duke remained in the library, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of centuries, and found no wisdom of his own. Catherine did not know that the Duke was in the library when she sought refuge there. She only knew that the supper room had become suffocating, the warmth of too many bodies, the weight of too many glances, the unrelenting pressure of performing composure she genuinely felt but was exhausted by displaying. She excused herself from Lady Ashworth's table with a murmured request for a moment of quiet, and the Duchess, with a knowing look, directed her to the library at the end of the east corridor. The door was heavy oak, carved with acanthus leaves and the Ashworth crest. She opened it without knocking. It was a library, after all, a public room, and stepped inside. The Duke stood at the window, silhouetted against the dark glass. He turned at the sound of the door. For a suspended moment, neither of them moved. Catherine's hand remained on the door handle. Every instinct urged her to retreat, to close the door and return to the safety of the supper room. But Catherine Merriweather had not spent the past week being remade by the Dowager Countess only to flee at the first test of her resolve. She closed the door behind her. The latch clicked softly. "Your Grace." "Miss Merriweather." His voice was rougher than she remembered. He looked older, the lines of his face deeper, the shadows beneath his eyes darker. He had not been sleeping. She filed this observation away without allowing it to soften her. "I did not intend to ambush you. I came here to be alone." "As did I." She remained near the door, her hands clasped before her. "We seem to have similar instincts." A dangerous admission. He attempted a smile. It did not reach his eyes. "We have not spoken since." "We have not spoken since you announced your engagement to Lady Lydia Pemberton in a ballroom where I was standing not 30 feet away. Yes, I am aware of when we last spoke." The words were sharp. She had not intended them to be, but they were. The Duke absorbed them without flinching. "I deserve that." "You deserve a great deal more than that." Catherine's voice was steady, but something beneath it trembled, not with weakness but with suppressed force, like water behind a dam. "You deserve to be told that I wrote you a letter I never sent, that I carried my affection for you like a secret wound, that I stood in that ballroom and watched you choose another woman and felt something in me die. I should tell you all of that. But I will not, because it would give you power over me, and I have spent the past week learning that my power comes from refusing to hand it away." The Duke took a step toward her. She held up her hand and he stopped. "The Dowager Countess showed you my letter," she continued. "I know she did. I received a note from my aunt's maid this morning confessing that she had taken it from my desk and delivered it to the Countess. I should be furious. I find I am only tired." She drew a breath. "You read words I never intended for your eyes. You read my confession of love, and now you stand here in this library looking at me as though you expect that letter to change everything. Does it not?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "You loved me." "I loved a man who spoke to me in a rain-soaked garden. I loved a man who admitted he was frightened of thunderstorms and laughed at his own foolishness. I loved a man who saw me, who truly saw me for the space of an afternoon." Her eyes glittered, but no tears fell. "That man disappeared the moment you walked into a ballroom and chose political advantage over human connection. I do not know who you are now, Your Grace, and I do not think you know either." The silence that followed was the most honest moment that had ever passed between them. The Duke stood motionless, struck by words that were not cruel but were utterly, devastatingly true. "You are right," he said. "I do not know who I am. I was raised to be a title, not a man. I was taught that duty was everything, that feeling was weakness, that a strategic marriage was the highest expression of responsibility to my name and my lineage. I believed these things. I acted on them. And then I read your letter and I realized that I have been wrong about every single choice I have ever made. He took another step. She did not stop him this time. The engagement to Lady Lydia is being dissolved. The Pembertons will announce it tomorrow. I am not telling you this to claim you. I have no right to claim anything. I am telling you because you deserve to know that your letter changed the course of my life. Not because it flattered me, because it shamed me, because it showed me what I could have had if I had been brave enough to reach for it. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. The candlelight painted his features in gold and shadow. He was still the most compelling man she had ever seen, and he was also the most frustrating, and she loved him despite everything, and that love was a problem she would have to solve another day. I need time, she said. I need to know that the man in the garden still exists. I need to know that you are capable of choosing me not because the ton has chosen me, not because the dowager has made me fashionable, but because you see me the way you saw me then, as a person worthy of risk. I do see you, his voice cracked on the last word. I see you, I have always seen you. I was simply too much a coward to act on what I saw. Catherine nodded slowly. Then prove it. Not tonight, not with grand gestures. Prove it in the small moments, in the quiet decisions, in the way you live your life when no one is watching. That is the man I loved. That is the man I might love again. She turned and walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when he spoke her name. Catherine. She paused. I will prove it, whatever it takes, however long it takes, I will prove it. She opened the door and stepped into the corridor. She did not look back. She did not need to. She had said everything she came to say, and somewhere in the library behind her, a duke was learning what it meant to be a man. The corridor was empty. Catherine walked 3 steps, then stopped and pressed her palm against the wall. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were trembling. She allowed them to tremble now in private, where no one could see. She had done it. She had spoken her truth without apology and without surrender. She had walked away not from love but from the diminished version of it he had offered. Whatever happened next was his burden to carry. She had carried hers long enough. In the library, the Duke of Hartwell remained at the window for a very long time. When he finally emerged, his face was set in an expression that his valet would later describe as resolved, the look of a man who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. The musical evening had ended. The guests had departed. The candles had burned low. But something had begun in that library that would reshape the season, and everyone who mattered would feel its effects. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of summer heat and social maneuvering, and a quiet that felt, to those who understood such things, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. The Pembertons announced the dissolution of the engagement with a carefully worded statement that cited irreconcilable differences of temperament. No one believed it. Everyone understood. Lady Lydia retreated to the family estate in Surrey, her golden curls and bright smiles packed away like seasonal decorations. Lord Pemberton's political coalition continued to crumble, and he devoted himself to salvaging what remained of his influence with an energy that bordered on desperation. The Ton noted these developments and filed them away in the vast ledger of social memory. Catherine Merriweather did not retreat. She remained in London with her aunt, the lease on the Half Moon Street townhouse mysteriously extended by an anonymous benefactor whom everyone knew to be the Dowager Countess of Morton. She accepted invitations selectively: a dinner at Lady Jersey's, a card party at Lady Cowper's, a drive in Hyde Park with Lord Cedric Ashworth, whose attendance was so constant and so respectful that the betting books at White's began taking wagers on which man would prevail. Cedric himself was under no illusions. He had spoken with Catherine honestly on one of their drives, the phaeton moving slowly through the crowded park, while the fashionable world watched from their carriages. "I am aware that your heart is engaged elsewhere," he said, his hands steady on the reins. "I am not attempting to supplant the Duke. I am attempting to demonstrate that you have options, that you are not waiting in a tower for rescue, but choosing your own path with full knowledge of what is available to you. Catherine looked at him with genuine warmth. You are a good man, Captain Ashworth. The woman who eventually claims your heart will be fortunate indeed. I will accept that compliment and the gentle rejection it contains. He smiled, unoffended. But I will remain in attendance until you have secured the outcome you desire. Consider me a strategic asset. I consider you a friend. That too, he said, and urged the horses forward. The Duke of Hartwell, meanwhile, was proving something. He had not approached Catherine directly since the night in the library. He had not sent flowers or letters or declarations. He had not attempted to leverage their shared moment or to pressure her with his title or his remorse. Instead, he had begun a quiet campaign of transformation that the Tun observed with fascination. He withdrew from the political machinations that had consumed his time. He visited his estates and spoke with his tenants, not as a duke inspecting property, but as a man learning the details of lives he had previously ignored. He dissolved a business partnership that his advisors had long urged him to sever, one that had profited from practices he now recognized as exploitative. He attended church every Sunday and sat not in the ornate family pew, but among the congregation, a choice that generated more commentary than any political maneuver he had ever made. And he wrote letters. Not to Catherine, he was too wise for that. He wrote to Lady Matilda Hargrove, inquiring after her health with specific, thoughtful questions. He wrote to the Dowager Countess, thanking her for her counsel and admitting with painful honesty the extent of his failures. He wrote to the Duchess of Ashworth, expressing his admiration for her nephew Lord Cedric, whose character, he acknowledged, far exceeded his own in matters of integrity. Each letter was a small stone, laid carefully in a foundation he was building without knowing whether it would ever support the weight of what he hoped for. The Dowager Countess read his letter and showed it to Catherine without comment. Catherine read it and refolded it and placed it in the drawer of her writing desk, where it joined the other small artifacts she was collecting. A pressed flower from the garden at Haverford Park, a program from the musical evening, a handkerchief she had carried that night in the library and never used. "Does he mean it?" she asked the Dowager one afternoon, sitting in the Countess's sunlit drawing-room while Lady Matilda dozed in a nearby chair. "I have spent 60 years reading men," the Dowager replied. "I have seen them lie, scheme, manipulate, and perform. This is none of those things. The Duke of Hartwell is engaged in the most difficult work a man of his station can undertake, genuine self-examination. Whether he succeeds is not for me to judge, but he is sincere in the attempt." Catherine nodded slowly. She had felt the truth of his words in the library. She had seen the change in his bearing, heard it in the reports that filtered back to her through the intricate channels of society, but she was not yet ready to trust it. Trust, she had learned, was not a gift. It was a verdict, delivered only after the evidence had been weighed. The evidence continued to accumulate. On the first day of August, the Duke of Hartwell hosted a dinner at his London residence. The guest list was notable not for its grandeur but for its humility. A physician who had pioneered treatments for childhood fever, a botanist whose work on crop rotation had improved yields across 3 counties, a schoolmaster from a foundling hospital, and 3 of his own tenants chosen by lot. There were no lords, no ladies, no political heavyweights. The menu was simple. The conversation was genuine. Lady Jersey, who heard about it from her sister-in-law who had driven past Hartwell House and seen the unlikely guests arriving, declared it the most peculiar dinner of the season. The Dowager Countess, upon hearing this assessment, smiled and said, "Precisely." Catherine heard about the dinner from Cedric, who had been invited at the last minute in his capacity as a naval officer, who had served alongside men from every station. He described the evening in detail. The physician's passionate defense of inoculation, the botanist's quiet pride in his work, the schoolmaster's stories of children who arrived hungry and learned anyway. "He asked questions," Cedric said. "He listened to the answers. He did not perform interest, he was interested. The man I saw that night was not the man who announced his engagement to Lady Lydia Pemberton. I do not know what happened to that man, but I suspect Miss Merriweather had something to do with his disappearance. The season drew toward its close. The Tun began its annual migration to country estates, and the Dowager Countess of Morton announced her intention to host a private dinner at her Surrey estate, a gathering of 30 guests, carefully chosen, to mark the end of a season that had been, by any measure, extraordinary. The invitation to Catherine was hand-delivered. The invitation to the Duke arrived the same day. The evening was warm and golden, late summer light slanting through the windows of Morton Hall. The Dowager had arranged the seating with the precision of a master strategist, Catherine near the head of the table, the Duke at the foot, with a long stretch of distinguished guests between them. The meal was exquisite. The conversation flowed, and when the final course had been cleared and the port was circulating, the Duke of Hartwell rose to his feet. The table fell silent. The Duke looked down the long expanse of mahogany and silver and candlelight, and he looked directly at Catherine Merriweather. "I have prepared no speech," he said. "I have learned that prepared speeches are a form of armor, and I no longer wish to wear armor. I wish only to speak the truth." He paused. The silence was absolute. 3 months ago, I stood in a ballroom and made a choice that dishonored a woman of extraordinary character. I made that choice out of cowardice, out of a lifetime of believing that duty and feeling were incompatible. I was wrong. I have spent every day since learning how wrong I was, and I have spent those days attempting to become a man worthy of the woman I failed. He drew a breath. "I am not asking for forgiveness tonight. I am not asking for an answer. I am simply stating, before witnesses whose good opinion I value, that I love Miss Catherine Merriweather. I love her mind, her dignity, her quiet courage, her refusal to accept less than she deserves. I love the woman who saw me in a rain-soaked garden and the woman who walked away from me in a library. I will continue to prove myself worthy of her for as long as she requires. And if she never requires it, if she chooses another path, I will accept her decision with the respect she has always deserved." He raised his glass. "To Miss Merriweather, not because she needs my tribute, because I need to give it." The table erupted. Glasses were raised, voices clamored, and the Dowager Countess of Morton, seated at the head of the table, allowed herself a smile of deep and genuine satisfaction. Catherine rose from her chair. The noise subsided. She walked the length of the table. Every eye followed her. The Duke stood motionless, his glass still raised, his expression raw with hope and fear in equal measure. She stopped before him. She did not speak for a long moment, and in that moment the entire room held its breath. "I have loved you," she said quietly, "since a rainy afternoon when you admitted you were afraid of thunder. I have loved you through a ballroom full of witnesses who saw only Lady Lydia's triumph. I have loved you through 3 weeks of watching you become the man I always believed you could be. And I have learned that love is not a surrender. It is a choice, made freely, by a woman who knows her own worth." She reached up and took the glass from his hand. She raised it. "To the Duke of Hartwell, who learned that a title does not make a man makes the title." She drank. The room erupted again, louder this time, and the Dowager Countess rose from her chair and lifted her own glass, and the Duchess of Ashworth followed, and Lord Cedric Ashworth, with a smile of genuine pleasure, joined them. "To the Duchess," the Dowager said, her voice carrying clearly through the tumult, "not by appointment but by acclamation." The Duke looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at the Duke. And in the golden light of a late summer evening, surrounded by the most powerful witnesses in the kingdom, they began the long work of building a life together, not on the shifting sands of social advantage, but on the solid ground of mutual recognition, hard-won trust, and love that had been tested in the fire and emerged refined. The kingdom had chosen its Duchess, and she had chosen herself first.